Hello, one concurrent viewer. Thank you for coming so quickly. This video was the result of the ideas contained in another video by 5 Pillars, the report of Roshan, Salih, from 5 Pillars. He went to Afghanistan and he was saying basically the Afghans, the Taliban really weren't that bad. He saw a few women, and we even saw one without a hijab. And really the Taliban are not as bad as they were made out to be. And, all those sort of horror stories of people clinging to airplanes about to take off were really pity stories told by Afghans who wanted to leave the country with the Americans, as you would expect. What is this to do with labour relations? Well, I hope you will watch to the end of that 1 hour. It's just slightly under 1 hour. And it's basically him and Dilly Hussein talking, sitting in one of their kitchens and talking about the situation. What I thought was interesting was in the 53rd minute, talking about white people and sort of saying, well, they're not very bright, are they? They don't seem to get it. They don't like immigration, but they keep voting for these governments that keep bombing the crap out of Muslim countries, and then they're surprised. They're surprised that these people come to their country. But they will keep voting for these governments that keep these wars going. And this linked with what's happening with Julian Assange is it's pretty clear. I mean, it's like it's so blindingly clear that democracy is unsustainable and it's stupid, and we know that the average voter doesn't give a shit about who their government murders and maims in their name. They don't care. All they care is the price of beer and cigarettes and, all the things that they want to buy. But, if their country is doing something bad to another country, they don't give a shit. They might complain if, the migrants from that particular country, that their government allied with another Western imperialistic government has destroyed that country, and then they come over and they complain. But other than that, they don't give a shit. So that for me was the most interesting comment made by these 2 Muslims talking about white people who are not very bright with their democracy. Now, people will just say, look, democracy may not be the best thing, but it's, the best system of government we've ever had. And obviously there have been demagogues who have been very bad for, all these countries. I'm certainly not saying, just have a non-democratic government and you'll get better. Then you'll get better government. We know what Hitler did as a dictator. He obviously couldn't stop himself. He wanted to invade this country here and that country there, and started the Second World War. So really, there's no guarantee of peace, whether it be a liberal democracy or a dictatorship, because there's always a temptation to distract from domestic problems by having a war abroad. Thinking that if you successfully invade another country, the people who are really pissed off with you at home will be happy that you were successful in war. And this is how it's always been before liberal democracy anyway. what has this to do with labour relations? Well, we don't think in terms of labour as military personnel, but this is, all about, manpower. You need manpower to build buildings, work in factories, do the farming, and also join the military. So it's all about the availability of manpower to do these things that could be arguably nation building. So what is to be done? People, they don't see, it's like people make the connection or they don't. And it seems obvious that, well, if you go around destroying other people's countries and they have a tendency to come to your country after you've destroyed their country, then there's a problem. But the proletariat don't seem to be able to make the connection, or they temporarily hold the idea in their mind for a while and then they forget about it. Now I'm thinking of the BNP, and it used to have quite a thoughtful foreign policy. A decent acknowledged that it wasn't a good idea to go around destroying Muslim countries because these Muslims have a tendency to come here, and this is what BNP members tend to complain about. But these apparently complicated thoughts are not held in the minds of these party activists for very long, or it's not reinforced. I know I got the point a long time ago, and that's why I've been saying that I don't believe in democracy. I think the world would be a better place if we were all nations implementing secular Quranism, because the Islamic principles of warfare are very clear. They say you're not supposed to invade other countries, so only defensive wars are allowed, and if this were generally understood, then there would actually be less war. I know there have been people who argue that the Quran contradicts itself because it talks about the imposition of the jizya, which is a conditional tribute that the successful conquering Muslim nation can exact from a conquered country. So if you've been invaded by a Muslim country and you would be given the option of either converting to Islam or paying a conditional tribute to keep your religion. And what happened in Arabia after the death of Muhammad was that the entire Arabian Peninsula, is it a peninsula? Anyway, it was a kind of domino theory in that country after country fell to the Muslim conquerors because the bargain was so seductive. So if you've been defeated by a Muslim country, the Muslim country would say, well, you can avoid paying the jizya, but only if you convert to Islam and join forces with us and go and attack the next country. And this is what they duly did. And so, in fact, the Muslim conquerors hardly got any jizya, but they managed to convert the whole of Arabia to Islam because it was an irresistible bargain. Now, people talk about empires being acquired by war, and this, of course, is true. But the reward of these wars is that you get a long peace. If you administer a successful empire and you keep it, obviously there will be problems when an empire is declining and then it becomes reckless and it fights wars that it's actually not able to fight, like a belligerent drunk. trying to prove himself, with other people in a bar, picking fights, and getting knocked out, which was what happened to Britain in 2 world wars. It picked a fight with Germany and basically got clobbered, but managed to pretend that it didn't get clobbered. But anyway, it did. And it wasn't a problem with just Britain, but, it happened, well, it was a problem with France as well, who also had a global empire. And basically, the reason why we have Holocaust denial laws, in my view, is because the governments of France and Britain wanted to preserve a particular narrative of why they lost their empire. So if it was boldly put to Frenchmen and the British that their governments stupidly lost their global empire because they just blundered into war, well, ordinary Frenchmen and ordinary Britons would wonder what went wrong, and maybe they should do something to remove this kind of government or system of government that resulted in the loss of empire. Now, I don't know what the British or the French think of as their greatest achievement. I think surely it must be empire. I don't know, you can say, our language, Shakespeare, crowd to a halt, haven't I? Okay, well, the English legal system, great works of literature, but really, the objective measure of national achievement would be empire, because you can easily measure the expanse of your empire and its duration, and of course the British can say, well, we were the empire upon which the sun never set, and this was also the achievement of the Spanish Empire that was replaced by the British Empire. And so it must be the objective measure of national achievement. And if this is the case, obviously the government who lost the British their empire would be, well, should be challenged and questioned. And now worse things have happened, because I think the British are beginning to realise that they are only a US vassal state. This has been said before a long time ago, the British are the poodles of the Americans, and Britain is a US missile base. This was said in Yes Minister. I'm old enough to remember Yes Minister, and Sir Humphrey Appleby was the one who said that the UK was a US missile base, and no more than that. And today, in which Julian Assange was basically given up to the Americans because by those high court judges who were basically told that they had to give up Assange. even though, well, technically is British, technically Australia is British, and so is Canada. They've never declared their independence from Britain. Technically, they are the dominions of the British Empire. But after the war, they stopped talking in these terms because, well, they didn't want to provoke people. The Australians were, well, I suppose, regularly harvested for manpower to fight the imperial wars of the British and now the imperial wars of the Americans. And the Canadians too, and of course the recruits for these imperial wars would come from the lower classes, the proletariat if you prefer, the plebs. And then afterwards they're not particularly well looked after until Trump came along and promised he would look after these vets better than the previous government. I think the difficulty is that people won't acknowledge that there is a problem with democracy. I realise I'm, only one woman. I can't really prove to you that I have any intellectual or moral authority other than not having lost any arguments to anyone. But this doesn't help because people don't really care about truth, logic and morality. They want their opinion, and if it comes into conflict with truth, logic and morality, then truth, logic and morality will have to stand aside. This is how things are done in the West now. It used to be the case that if something I say is true and what you say is false, you would have to concede that I won the argument once I prove to you that what you rely on is in fact false. But no such agreement now exists. And so things are very difficult indeed, unless I have an army, if I have, the manpower that I would need to make people listen to me, I can't influence anyone or anything. So this is fundamentally the problem of the West. It's not operating on truth, logic and morality. And I'm saying it should be. I'm saying it's the only thing that you can operate on if you want to enjoy good government. And it seems that by the time I get to that point, people will have forgotten what I'd said before about democracy being dementia and Christianity being the wrong religion and having the wrong kind of foreign policy that resulted in the loss of your global empire. And now being generally kicked around by the Americans, who don't really care much either for their own people or for any of the peoples of the vassal states that come under their control. So I really don't know what is to be done, except to keep saying the same thing again and again and hope that somebody honourable and influential can allow me a bigger platform or even say the thing that I say themselves. People are welcome to steal my ideas. I would be flattered. But it seems people are stuck in their own little narratives of, what was it? It's always the Jews did it. Now, another thing about Jews is that they're not really in control. Certainly the good ones, or the ones who are, the religious ones. The liberal assimilationist Jews, they don't count. I mean, they might as well be liberal Gentiles, because they don't follow any rule, they don't believe in God, But unfortunately, the Orthodox Jews are not. Well, I suppose they know the lie of the land. They know they're not going to win any arguments against the Western political establishment. They're not going to win it in Israel because the government is secular. They know that any rabbi that Gentiles will have heard about are, in fact, morally compromised. And therefore they will have as little to do with Gentiles as possible, because presumably they'll always be insulted and mocked and accused of all kinds of things. So I think the problem is systemic. I'm saying that democracy is a problem, and this is something that Hitler knew about and wrote about it quite strikingly in Mein Kampf. He explained how many important decisions can be hidden in a parliamentary majority, how the instigator of a particularly bad policy will always be able to hide behind that majority and escape scrutiny, criticism, and challenge. So unless dissidents wish to talk about anything that is more than just blaming the Jews or, their usual pathetic preoccupations, then of course we're not going to get anywhere. Well, what was striking in that video by Five Pillars was how airily it was expressed that white people just don't get it. They can't make obvious connections, possibly because they don't care. They don't care who their government maims and murders, and they only care when these people wash up on their shores, and then they start blaming the Jews. So maybe there's no point dealing with these people, because they'll never change. They'll they don't want to admit that they're wrong. So people who blame the Jews all their lives will continue blaming the Jews because they don't want to admit that their anti-Semitism was fundamentally wrong. I mean, if Jews are cleverer than Christians, it's because Christianity is such a stupid religion. But they're not going to admit that. I mean, if they're always complaining about Jews and Muslims, it's because these people, these Jews and these Muslims with their religion, have the protection of their religion, and these anti-Semites and Islamophobes don't get it. What they want is more democracy, and democracy is obviously unviable because people are stupid. Democracy would only work if most voters are wise, and we know they're the opposite of that. They're really as thick as shit. And they still think that voting is going to get them the kind of government that they want. I mean, Connopps is not known for his stupidity, but he talks about his social democracy like, one of these days it's going to happen. And I don't think he believes it himself, but it's something to say, isn't it? If he says something in his liberal way, the fact that he's not a pleb will mean that he wins the argument. So if there is no intention of admitting the problem, and I see that there isn't, nobody really cares? They just want to be right. And they're so stupid and wrong, but they can't do it. They can't admit that their religion is the wrong religion. And I've been saying that the only way you can control your politicians is to make sure that the rules people have to play by are the rules that most people support. So at the moment there is no political orthodoxy that anybody can name or anybody can agree on. I mean, we know what is our political orthodoxy. Is it liberalism? And if it's liberalism, can anybody agree on the principles of liberalism? No. I mean, that's where the conversation breaks down. Principles? What the fuck are these principles? What are they for? Can you eat them and drink them and wear them and burn them? No, nobody wants principles. And principles can only come from moral principles, and you have no moral principles if you don't have a religion, and you don't want a religion. You just want things to get better without having to change your mind about anything at all. But the great thing about religions, great religions, is that they have rules, and the people who follow these rules, well, A, they know what they are, B, they're proud that they follow them, or even if they don't follow them, they kind of pretend that they do. And by doing that, it is what's called the tribute that vice pays to virtue. And these rules are useful because we kind of need to know what something is supposed to do, or what somebody is supposed to do, and whether they do it or not. So there would be this, chasm between theory and practice. So if I tell you that I speak the truth, and most of the time you catch me lying, then you know that I'm a dishonest person. If I say that I'm a logical person, and most of the time I talk nonsense, then you know that I'm lying. If I tell you I'm a principled person and I have no principles, or I don't even know what they are, then you will know that I'm a fraud. So at this very basic level, that's what these big words are for, and nobody will discuss them. And I'm afraid only people who claim to believe in God have something more than a nodding acquaintance with these ideas. So what I say remains true, that you have the wrong religion, you don't believe in it, and your politicians certainly don't, and those of you who dissent from the current political orthodoxy, you don't. You don't have a religion either, so you have no code of behaviour other than your moods, your opinions, which change from time to time, and your emotions, your moods, your changing opinions and your emotions. And still you don't think you need a new religion. The old one is good enough for you, right? I have been told that I'm probably mistaken in thinking that I can prize the corpse of Christ from your fingers, your arms, your determined vice-like grip on something that you know has failed. I don't know what impels you to hold on to something that has clearly lost its utility. It only ever worked when you were threatened horribly. And even now, I can't seem to find an American who has read the farewell speech of George Washington about not having political parties because they are a source for endless division and endless conflict over something that doesn't need to be there at all. So the Americans, they would call themselves nationalists in the early days of the Republic. I tend to approve of that because, well, I definitely do approve of that because we need to know what the government is supposed to be doing, and it's supposed to be governing in the national interest. And I imagine any government that wants to survive will care about the national interest. But interestingly, now nobody wants to talk about the N-word. I guess the more ignorant, more aggressive kind of plebeian will say, no, we don't want civic nationalism. There's only one kind of nationalism we want to talk about, and that's ethno-nationalism. And I think that is fundamentally wrong. Not because I'm not indigenous, but it's always wrong to focus on particular groups, on the material rather than the abstract. The nation, after all, comprises, well, all the people who live in it, all who have a right to live in it, and therefore it ought to be about them. And it's not just about them, the living citizens of the country as it is now, but if you want to talk about the long-term national interest, you will have to be thinking about future generations that, well, we will never meet. It's impossible to have this kind of conversation with anyone at all. The impossible hurdle of getting Westerners to accept that their religion has been the wrong one all along it's not a smooth one, is it? So now we have all these atheists saying, no, we don't need a religion. We can make up something. And then everybody will be happy. They can make up something the way Hitler did, or Mussolini did, or Marx. But it's all been done before, hasn't it? And failed. Not that everything Hitler said was wrong. I mean, I do think he actually makes very insightful comments about the operation of democracy. And it was what he said about democracy that is so central to his decision to become absolute dictator, so that he would take responsibility for everything that went right and everything that went wrong. But really, we won't have any government governing in the national interest if we can't agree as a people who are supposed to be honest and rational and principled, and who are therefore supposed to care about the national interest. We won't be able to restore the patriarchy, and by that I mean that we have to have a government whose laws support marriage and family values. And I don't think there is any kind of obvious majority of people supporting that. I think most people will be happy to die childless, and even those who are parents, who have daughters of childbearing age, don't really care if they have grandchildren or not. They must know that the difficulty of any woman of childbearing age now to find a man prepared to marry her is, well, rather worse than when they try to get married. But they don't seem to be able to make the connection, or they think, well, things will just magically improve if they keep voting. So I don't really know how to deal with this kind of stubborn stupidity and deliberate incomprehension. I suppose from, Ralph's group, you kind of understand that incels, they have no prospect or intention of becoming married fathers, so they're just going to LARP as anti-Semites and Christians to, blame the Jews or, whatever. But they know they won't be getting married and won't be becoming fathers, and therefore they don't need to restore the patriarchy to make it easier for people to marry and make it easier for those who marry to stay in their marriage in order to better parent their legitimate offspring. There is no such thinking. What about the previous generation? I guess people of my age. I seem to be the only one prepared to say these things. I'm quite open about my political views to any of my friends who care to raise it with me. It's not like I hide my Facebook posts from my Facebook friends. But it is not something that is generally discussed. Is there a particular duty to have children if one doesn't feel so inclined? I suppose not. If we're not suited to become married parents, if nobody wants to marry us, if we don't particularly want to marry anyone. But I think we can concede the point that if our nation is to stay in existence, some of us have to produce the goods and bring them up properly and get the government to set in place a system of education and training that would make school leavers attractive employees. But for some reason people just don't think like that. They can't think beyond the next, I don't know. They can't think in those terms because they are incels, I suppose. We are, talking about morons and vegetables bumping along at the bottom in difficulty, acknowledging that democracy may not be the best system, Christianity is kaput, and they're not going to get over their hatred of Jews and Muslims, which is now part of their identity. Alan Bastard helpfully says I should advertise my show in notifications. Well, they can watch it later, can't they? I don't know when. I don't really know when I want to stream. I mean, I could easily not have streamed, right? And I mean, what's the problem of watching it later and then posting your comments in the chat? Which I mean, in the video below, you'll still be heard. In fact, your comments would be more coherent and I would be more likely to see them and actually post a response to them. But it's this desire for immediate gratification I suppose makes people want streams to be live, and then not bother them, about them if they're not live. But actually, I prefer streams to have been. Okay, there are two advantages. Of course, it's nice to, commune in real time with other people in a chat. But also, after the stream is complete, you can listen to it at double speed and save time. So, I mean, either is fine by me. I don't know who Wilson Phipps is. Oh, Phillips. I don't know your references. So I think I've worked out that, neoliberalism is about solving the Western labour problem. And obviously, if you're going to get your labour from another country, your own indigenous working classes will have something to say about it. But since Western governments are they painted themselves into the corner of saying democracy is a wonderful thing, and anyone who has a one-party state, is a fascist or a Nazi or a commie, then you're going to be in difficulties reforming your system, because anybody who says let's have a one-party state like me will be immediately ignored and ostracised. But nobody said that, and I noticed that Brundle wouldn't say that. I don't know what, I mean, I actually discussed it with him before, years ago. But he's not going to talk about that. I mean, there are all sorts of, non-contentious ways that you can talk about politics, such as abolishing no-fault divorce, one-party state. But you're not going to do that because you don't want to stick your necks out, and because you don't want to get cancelled. And so nothing's going to be said. And the people above you, well, they don't care. They're not going to be sticking their necks out for you guys. So the only people who might say something or do something would be people who have a religion, like those Muslims I was talking about. So these Muslims, or whatever you think of them, they would have rules of behaviour that are generally known by Muslims, and they know what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do, and they know they're supposed to cooperate with each other. But the Islamophobes who hate them have no code of behaviour, and that's why they won't ever organise so much as a piss-up in a brewery, because they're too ashamed to even say their name. Embark on any course of consistent, coherent political activism, and if they did, they would contradict themselves, because they get scared if their idea was not popular. They would say different things to different people in the way Ralph does, just to churn up a good number of viewers and subscribers who are, virtually useless, because they don't give a good impression of the dissident right. And it's not really intended to go anywhere anyway, because it's a hug box. Ralph's streams are a hug box of people who want change without having to change. Without having to change even their minds about how things are meant to be, or whether they believe in God or not. So I've had a few interesting discussions with Domingo, and he doesn't know. He doesn't know if he believes in God or not. He literally doesn't know. So I ask him if he believes in Jesus, and there's a kind of awkward silence. So it's pretty clear that he doesn't really literally believe that Jesus is God. He just resents the fact that, Jews have a different view and Muslims have a different view. How dare they? How dare they come to his country and tell them that his religion is wrong? And that's really it. But I think it's important to choose the best religion. If you do care about your country, if you really are a nationalist, you should care about the long-term national interest of your country. And the first thing you must do, if you know that your moral system is kaput, is to, do something about it, rather than simply deny it and wish all the annoying things and people away and nothing more. So an easily understood narrative would be that, it was the wrong religion, so we have to change it. And here's the Christianity adjacent religion, and that's Islam. Because Christianity was bound to fail. All along it was bound to fail. Yes, it had a few good centuries. It kept itself going for 2,000 years. And now it's time to move on to something better. Something that is logical. So Christianity is basically trusting in your absolute monarch. That was what Christianity was all about, the divine right of kings. The divine right of kings that the American Republic rejected, that the founding fathers rejected, because they'd had enough of the tyranny of the mad king, Father George. Why should some madman, subject to periodic periods of insanity, be the one to rule the country? If he's not up to the job, surely somebody else in the kingdom can be found to do it. But then, if somebody else that isn't a king were found to rule the kingdom, it would no longer be a kingdom, it would be a republic. But the virtue of a republic is that the pool of talent that one can recruit from to lead the nation is infinitely bigger. So it would make sense. So, a sign of advancement from a Christian monarch with the divine right to rule, which is quite similar to the mandate of heaven that the Empress of China was subject to, and becoming an Islamic republic. So which is more advanced? I mean, the answer's obvious, isn't it? From being from just having a king to a one-party state that has mechanisms, selection criteria for who is going to be the next leader, the next president, the next caliph. There would be rules, there would be principles, and you can refer to them and say, does this person do what they say they're supposed to do? They don't just automatically inherit the right. And that's why you get really crap leaders who inflict loss and defeat on your country. And there's another thing in the Quran about consultation, when you are actually supposed to consult the people that you govern and take into account what they think of your government. So if you had these rights in mind, if you all knew your Quran, then a lot of the stuff that your government is doing to you now, they wouldn't do. Because if you incorporated the Quran into your constitution, you'd get your First Amendment. Well, not just the Americans. The Americans have their First Amendment, and we know where it comes from. It comes from the The White House Corona was owned by Jefferson. And we know Jefferson fiddled around with the Bible because he wanted to make a point. He basically cut out all the bits that weren't about miracles, that were only from Jesus. And there wasn't much left. If you look at the Jefferson Bible, it's a very thin little document. And this is obviously what Jefferson was trying to tell future generations of Americans, and they're not listening, are they? So why won't anything move? Because there is no connection from one American to another. Nobody is really talking about these things in real life. They're not talking to real people that they know, whose faces they are familiar with. And so nothing can be organised. I can talk to Brundle, and he has some idea in his head that once upon a time in America there was a one-party state. And that's it, and he's not going to say that he wants it. He's not going to discuss it with anyone. And what about the bigger YouTubers who have more subscribers than me? Will they be talking about anything sensible? We all see. I mean, obviously I will be listening to Millennial. But you see, the fact that I'm not being allowed on his channel is testament to the herd-like behaviour of everyone else. People can only agree on very few things, such as hatred of Jews, hatred of Muslims, hatred of immigration, the solution of kicking everyone out, and then everything will be fine again, right? Kicking all those Jews, all those Muslims, all those non-whites, and once you kick them out, everything will be fine and white. And is this equated with a button? It's like, here are two buttons, and you can press either. You can press the ethno-nationalist button, or you can press the civic nationalist button. Which one are you going to do? But it's not really even a question of preference. It's about what is possible within your lifetime. So I've already said that, it's, if you think in terms of ethno-nationalism, it's because you're still into the childlike fantasy of wish list politics. You want a whole bunch of things. You haven't applied your mind to how you're going to get it. And I'm saying civic nationalism is roadmap politics. You have to get people to agree with you as much as they can. So you have a rule book that has something in it for, enough people, enough of the important groups who are men and women, the young and the old, the rich and the poor, and the majority and the minority. And that's how it then becomes obvious that secular Quranism must be the answer to a workable solution that is fair enough. Yes, I can see your comment, Diamond. So, I guess I'll finish now. I guess I haven't really said anything new other than bring to your attention what the Muslims are saying about you, and but I thought it was worth doing anyway. Thank you all for listening.